Good morning. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. Happy Wellness Wednesday. I hope you are all having a fabulous morning. If you are just stumbling on my page, my name is Donna. I'm a mom, a nana, a girlfriend, a runner, jazzerciser, bird watcher, big time. So if you see me looking distracted, there's hummingbird feeders right on the other side of this camera. I have been in a lifelong journey with anxiety and depression. I'm also studying for my Master of Science in Clinical Mental Health Counseling. And all of these things combined, along with a few other things, put it on my heart almost 2 years ago now, maybe 3 years ago. I'm on episode 180, so we're getting close to 3 years. In any case, I put it on my heart to share tips and tricks with others, things that I learned, things that I'm still learning about my journey with anxiety and depression, and encourage you to share your own, because it's kind of like a pure wisdom setting, which has a lot of science behind it, but we sometimes don't know that there are other things that might work for us until we hear somebody else say them. Sometimes we've heard things over and over and over again, but they don't click until we're ready to hear them, and it's, I don't know, coming in the right voice. So there's a lot of benefit to talking about our experiences together, sharing tips and tricks and things that we do. So I always encourage you, if you're just stumbling on my page, to engage on my lives. Drop a comment, ask a question, whatever. We just keep it politics free here as much as possible. And if you've been following me for a while, then you saw last week's video, hopefully, which was part 2 of this 3-part mini-series. And last week we talked about feeding the body. And the truth of the matter is if you've been watching, you know that the Feed Yourself mini-series has had very little to do with food. We've talked about food because it is important for feeding your brain, feeding your body. But it's really had very little to do with food. And it's had to do with a lot of different things that help to keep all of these things working together. So, with that said, if this week we are going to talk about feeding our hearts and souls. This one is definitely not about food, in the traditional sense. And if you're here, let me know you're here. If you don't see this till afterwards, hit hashtag replay in the comments, ask a question, drop a comment, share if you find it helpful, all of the things. If I don't respond to you when you say hi, Facebook doesn't always show me all the things. So, it's not because I'm ignoring you. It's because I didn't see it, and I usually respond afterwards anyway. So, if I see you, I will definitely acknowledge you. We will definitely talk, but, sometimes it just doesn't work that way. All right. So, last week's challenge, last week's video was about feeding the body. The video prior was about feeding the brain. Last week's challenge that I issued to you was to choose one body kindness that week. Which was to take a 10-minute walk, dance to one song, stretch, hydrate, go outside, play something. We talked a lot about play because we don't do that very much as adults anymore. So, to basically ask yourself what would feel good for your body today and do that thing. So it's part of a whole, what we tend to refer to as self-care, but it often, in the sense that I'm talking about it in this mini-series, it goes a little bit beyond self-care. So that was last week's challenge. Let me know if you did it. Let me know how it helped. You can always send me a message too if you're not comfortable sharing on a public forum. I totally get it. And now let's wrap this up and talk about how we can feed our hearts and souls. And for me, after the last several days, the timing on this could not be more perfect. And it's not like I planned it that way. So my question to you is, when was the last time that you did something that actually lifted you up or filled you up instead of just getting you through the day? We get in survival mode, y'all. We get in survival mode and we get these blinders on. And that's actually part of the reason why I left my last job, was because I had blinders on to the point where I no longer felt effective for myself or for them. So some of this is going to overlap over the last 2 because some of it still counts all the way around. So if you have watched the last 2 videos and you hear a couple things that you're like, hey, she said that already, that's why, because some of these things do in fact overlap. But why does it matter? Why does it matter if we, good morning, Miss Kayla. Why does it matter if we're getting through the day instead of getting filled up? Well, you can think clearly and you can move regularly. And we've been through that with the brain and the body, and we can still feel empty. We can still feel disconnected, burned out, numb, irritable, and who's got another fill in the blank here? You can toss a lot of words in here, but we can still feel, for me, a lot of times it was unfulfilled. Like there was still something missing, something I wasn't getting. And that's a heart and soul issue. That's not a productivity issue. Now, why do I say heart and soul? Well, some people consider them interchangeable, and some people consider them two separate things. So what I'm going for here in this episode is, what fills your soul? What makes your heart happy? More than likely, they're the same things. But you can choose to connect them or not connect them. But bottom line is, this is a heart and soul issue. This is not a productivity issue, because most of us are productive way beyond what we were ever designed to be. So what does feeding your heart and soul mean? It means making space for and intentionally seeking out connection, purpose, joy, meaning, peace, positive relationships, kindness to yourself, all of which boil down to spirituality. Ooh, that's a scary word. I thought we weren't getting political here, right? We're not, because a lot of times spirituality is confused with organized religion, and it can be very politically charged. But spirituality is defined as a broad, subjective human experience that's focused on seeking deeper meaning, or awareness, or purpose. So it's that search for something that's larger than yourself, if you will. And for different people, this can mean different things. It can mean a search for God. It can mean a search for the universe, for meaning in the universe. It can be a search for awareness. Whatever your lane is here, I am not here to judge or tell you one is right or wrong. I'm going to share my experience with you, but I am going to always respect yours. So what starves this? What starves our heart and souls? Because sometimes we're like, am I starving? And I don't mean physically, although I've been starving for the last couple of days physically. But what starves this? What starves it is constant busyness. What starves it is excessive isolation. And this one's a slippery slope, because for me, I need isolation sometimes. So when I say isolation, I mean where we feel just really cut off from everybody, the rest of the world, the ones we love most. That's the kind of isolation I'm talking about. Sometimes we need a little isolation to recharge. I was just talking about that with a friend last night. And that is sometimes very important for us to get away from the noise, to get away, especially if you're the type of person that absorbs other people's feelings. It is necessary to get away and just kind of have a little sanctuary. But the kind of isolation that I'm talking about is that I don't need anyone. I don't need anything. I'm just fine by myself, and just kind of cutting yourself off from the world. Good morning, Miss Raquel. So I lost my spot for a second. I have notes, y'all. I can't do all of this without some bullet points. All right. So these are the things when you're not leaving time for quiet or reflection. Other things that I know, negative self-talk, that can be something that starves us. Shocker, right? You guys know this is a soapbox for me. Comparison, another thing that can really starve us. Comparison to others, another shocker, right? We've talked about this many times before too. Lack of quiet or reflection, and always pouring out to others, but never refilling. And then finally, living on autopilot. If we're living on autopilot all the time, then that's a sign of a problem, that we're not feeding our hearts and souls. So, little over a year ago, my boyfriend was in the hospital. And I was very much on autopilot during that time. I was getting up in the morning and I was rolling out of bed and I was going to the hospital. And then I was coming home early enough in the evening to get a few things done at home and to allow him to rest. Or if he had other people visiting, to just kind of make space for that. And I was so much on autopilot that my vehicle door, I have two older Jeep Cherokees. I'm a Jeep girl. And one of those doors was hanging open literally for about 36 hours, where I not only left and came back during that time in my other Jeep, but a friend came and dropped some things off for me, and we stood outside talking. And in all of that time, I never noticed that Jeep door was hanging open. And by the time I realized it, the battery was completely dead. And fortunately, nothing was missing. So that's the kind of autopilot I'm talking about, where we just don't even see obvious things because we are just going through the motions. We're not feeling it. We're not being part of it. We're just doing. And that's a real thing. And that kind of situation can starve our hearts and souls. Sometimes it's necessary in a situation like that. But y'all, sometimes even in our jobs, we're just so much in my last job, I had mastered my craft, if you will, as much as I possibly could have. But I was just going through the motions, and I wasn't feeling it anymore, and I wasn't paying attention anymore. And it wasn't causing mistakes, but I was feeling empty. I didn't feel like I was getting anything out of it anymore. So even though, even in one of my favorite events that I was putting together, I was having a hard time getting out of bed in the morning. And that was my sign that I was definitely beyond the point of burnout, to a point where I couldn't fix it myself. I had to do something different, because even my very favorite event that I had put together every single year, had become so much autopilot that I was just glued to the bed in the morning and I couldn't get up. It was the quintessential, just epitome of burnout. So these are the things that starve us. But most of the time, and you notice at the top of the list, is the constant busyness. And I can't ever, good morning, Miss Ann, put enough emphasis on the negative self-talk and the comparison to others. So how do we feed this? How do we feed our hearts and souls? How do we do better? Well, some of these, again, are going to sound repetitive, but we spend quiet time inside, outside, preferably in nature, or sometimes just even in our house. Again, this was part of the conversation last night, that sometimes I just need to rattle around my house on my own schedule and not on somebody else's timeline. Sometimes that's huge, where I don't have to feel the pressure of the timelines, and I can just, you know what, if I feel like sitting on the couch for 5 minutes, I can do that. If you feel like rearranging your furniture, you can do that. Whatever it is, it's on your own timeline and your own decisions, and nothing else from the outside world is pushing that timeline, whatever that is. Yard work, gardening counts for body too. You know what I mean? Those kinds of things. We talked about these with feeding your body, but these are things that can also feed your soul. There's a lot of science behind spending time out in nature, gardening, things like that, putting your fingers in the dirt to help you with grounding and to help mental health. There's a lot of science behind it, and I can go dig through the library and send you stuff all day. Another way to feed it is connection. We have a lot of superficial conversations. We just do, hey, how you doing? Great, thanks. And we're so busy that we can't really turn those conversations into anything meaningful. So we need to have meaningful conversations. We need to connect with others. We need to spend time with people who lift us up and make things fun even when they're hard. And I was very blessed to have a lot of that over the last couple of weeks. So quick shout out to my tribe. You know who you are. That helped me out a lot, that we were involved in event planning and so on. Even when things are hard, we should be able to find joy. Good morning, Miss Beverly. We should be able to find joy, and we should be able to have fun. And that largely depends on who we're surrounding ourselves with. So connection is super important. Being present without distraction. I try harder and harder all the time. It doesn't always work. But I try harder and harder all the time to have face-to-face conversations without my phone in my hand. I'm not perfect at it yet. Not by a long shot. But I'm trying more and more because we need to be present without having distractions. So this weekend, I was the walk manager for the second annual NAMI Walk Citrus. And because there was a lot going on, the weather was scary. We were waiting for some last minute changes and okays to move the event inside. And because of that, I had to have my notifications on Saturday. I don't ever have my notifications on, y'all. That is just one of those things where with the vibrating and the noises and all that, I just can't do it. If I had my notifications on all the time, I would chuck my phone out a window going down the highway. That would be it. And I almost have a couple times. So when my boyfriend was in the hospital and also this Saturday, those were times where I had my notifications on all the time in case something happened, in case something came up, or in case someone needed to get in touch with me. And it was hard to ignore. You know, it also talks to my watch, so things were vibrating and things were making noise. And I still, even with the notifications on, I still have it on silent, and I still have all the vibrating and all the buzzing and there was nobody that was more excited than me when the day was over and I could shut those off. So that's, you know, the phone can be a huge distraction for various reasons, especially if you've got a smartwatch and they're talking to each other all the time. iPads, what are they called? I don't have I have a Garmin. I don't have, what is it called? The Apple Watch. They all talk to each other. So if something comes in on one, it comes in on all of them. And it can just be really, really distracting. So connection is super important. And when we have those distractions, we are not always making those great connections. A lot of times we're passing each other in hallways. We're like, hey, what's up? And we're doing this. And we're lucky we're not walking into walls. So connection is a huge key part of feeding our hearts and souls. And when we can do that, when we can put our phones down and turn off the TVs and have face-to-face conversations, it makes a huge difference, and it fills us up in a way. You know, social media is great. We can be in touch with all the friends all the time. But it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing as a face-to-face conversation. So connection is super important to feeding our hearts and souls. Your inner voice, huge. We just touched on that a little bit with the negative self-talk. Y'all know this is a soapbox for me. When we are constantly beating up on ourselves, we have a difficult time finding joy, finding connection, finding meaning in anything. It's just a thing. And we've also talked in the past, you guys, I think I have baby hummingbirds out here because they're just acting different than any hummingbird I've ever seen. In any case, sorry, that was a distraction, but that was a nature distraction, so that's okay, right? Okay, so we've talked about this before. It's like the red car effect. Our brains will look for whatever we tell it to look for. So when we're constantly beating up on ourselves, we're constantly comparing to others and finding ourselves falling up short. And we are just that negative self-talk, that negative loop. That's what our brains are going to look for. They're going to look for evidence of what we're telling it. So this is huge because when we're beating up on ourselves all the time, we have a difficult time finding joy and connection and all of that. Another way we can feed our souls and our hearts is to do something that brings us joy. For me, obviously, I love watching the birds this time of year. We've had 2 nests in the yard. There's been babies. I've gotten to where I can identify the babies. It's just really cool, and it brings me a lot of joy. Anything fits here. Walking for me, you know, getting to the local park, which I'm going to try to do this week because I haven't done that in a while, so that I can run in the woods. These things are all, you can fill in the blank with anything here that feeds you joy, that makes you feel joy, rather. It doesn't have to be productive. It doesn't have to be efficient. That's not what we're talking about here. And it is most often not for anyone else, but sometimes it might be for other people. And we're going to talk about that more in just a minute, because sometimes the most joy that I feel is when I'm able to give to others, when I'm able to feel like I've had a positive impact on somebody else, do a little Secret Santa type drop, an anonymous type gift. Those are the things that often give me the most joy. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute here. So I'm going to get technical on you for a minute. Erickson, one of the founders of psychology, he founded the psychosocial stages of life development. There's a particular stage called generativity versus stagnation. And a lot of you that are watching, a lot of the people that I'm surrounded with because of my age, that stage of life is supposed to be, and of course this is very loose, anywhere between the ages of 40 and 65. I feel like I started gravitating towards this before I was 40. It's that stage of life where we tend to drift toward finding meaning and purpose. I don't know how to define that, y'all. Meaning and purpose. How do you define that? Because how you define it is what's going to matter when we get done with this today. But we tend to drift toward meaning and purpose in the generativity versus stagnation stage of life. We may want to nurture others more than we have before. We may want to mentor a younger generation. We may want to do things that benefit the future generations. We may be thinking more on a macro level where we're thinking about how our actions are affecting the earth, how they're affecting our community, different things like that. So we tend to start broadening our view and stop having it so focused on ourselves and more focused outward, like, what can I do to make a change? What can I do to make a difference? And that is not uncommon. But you can do that with even the tiniest things. Like I just talked about, helping others, doing small acts of kindness, paying for the person in the drive-thru behind you. And again, there's often a misnomer, if you're in the Starbucks drive-thru, well, if you're in the Starbucks drive-thru, they don't need you to pay for them because they can already afford it. Missing the point entirely. The point entirely is to do something completely selfless for others. And the truth of the matter is for me, a lot of times it's not selfless. It's because it makes me feel joy to see the look of surprise on somebody's face. Sometimes I don't even look. Sometimes I just drive away. It's not always Starbucks. Sometimes it's McDonald's. Not in drive-thrus a lot anymore. But there's other really cool things you can do. You can leave a note card with a $20 bill in it laying on a shelf at a convenience store, at a grocery store, whatever. I have found creative ways to leave money at the gas pump. There are just lots of really cool things you can do, and they don't all involve money. Holding doors, helping the person behind you in the grocery line unload their cart. There's just some really cool, simple things that you can do that will feed your heart and feed that joy and feed your soul. A lot of people get it from volunteering at hospitals, volunteering at events like the one I held that I was in charge of this weekend for NAMI Citrus for mental health. Whatever makes you feel that joy that I just described, those are the things you should do, that we should make time to do every single day, at least a couple times a week, because we're so busy. Like I said, we get on autopilot and we don't think about these things. And I don't know about you, but for me, a lot of times it's after the fact. I'll realize that somebody was behind me in the grocery line and they were much, much older than me, and they were struggling to get their groceries out of the cart, and I was in my own little world not paying attention, and I should have been helping them. And that's the only kind of should have I will accept. But it's a huge thing, and it is a thing. If we increasingly feel like we're at a loss and like we should be doing something to help others. And that's part of the reason that I'm in grad school right now, because I wasn't feeling fulfilled. And I kept feeling this pull towards counseling and towards something that would make me be able to lay down my head at night and feel like I was helping someone. I hope it works out that way. And then there's lots of ways to find quiet time and to reflect. We need to make time for reflection, not rumination. There's a difference. Reflection is reflecting on a lot of different things, like gratitude, like finding gratitude. I have shown you this before. This is my gratitude box. I have a notepad. I got to find another one like it because I'm running out. I think this came from Enterprise Car Services. But they're the perfect size to just write down the date, write down a little note about what I'm grateful for, and fold it up and stick it in the box. So that's one of the ways that we can spend time in reflection, is by finding gratitude around us. Because the more we look at things to be grateful for and identify them, the more things we're going to find to be grateful for. We can journal, we can pray, we can meditate, whatever it is that is in your lane that feels good to do, that makes you feel peaceful and serene, whatever that looks like for you. And then finally, another way to feed it is faith. And I'll be careful here because, again, I'm not here to judge anybody or tell anybody that what they do is right or wrong. But if you have faith in a higher power, whether it's the universe, whether it's God, whatever that looks like, a lot of times what feeds our soul is to turn to that. It's to turn to that and lean into it. And for me, I don't usually dig into this too far. But I had a pretty profound moment over the weekend. I've had some physical problems for the last almost 2 weeks. They shifted from one thing to another. And in the midst of all that, I had a paper due for my class. I had an event that I was putting together that we were expecting possible tornadoes and hail, and it was an outside stadium-based event. And I was just really scared. I was really scared all week. I was scared about a couple of the things I was having with my body, and I was scared about not being able to work out. And I was scared about the event, and there was just a lot. But for me, I leaned into my faith. I made it a point, even though I wasn't having time to work out. And there was a lot of things that I just couldn't do physically also. Even though a lot of my normal routine I couldn't do. One of the things I made it a point to make time for, because my faith is belief in God, was to sit down and read the Bible every morning, even if I wasn't making time for anything else. And I really leaned into my faith. I kept trying to remind myself to put God in the driver's seat and stop trying to control everything, to just focus on what I was supposed to be doing, not all the fears, not all the what ifs, not all the what are we going to do if, to just focus on what I was supposed to be doing and try to leave God in the driver's seat and let him drive. And on Saturday morning, the day of the event, I heard a very clear voice in my head while I was looking at the weather and worrying some more that said, "I've got you." And he did. Within an hour, I got a call from the school district that they were going to move us inside. And the wheels started rolling towards a different thing. I had done a lot of planning and nothing ended up looking like what I planned. But you know what? The word I've heard the most often about that event that night was that it was magical. That's not me, y'all. So my point here is, whatever your faith is, whatever your beliefs are, those are the kinds of things that will help. Leaning into that will help fill your cup. It will help feed your heart. It will help feed your soul. And it will help guide you on the things that you need to do more of that, feeding your heart and soul. And at the end of the day, a lot of times that doesn't look like helping ourselves. It looks like helping others. It looks like having a positive impact, serving your community. That's really what feeding your heart and soul boils down to. It's important to take time for ourselves. It's super important to put that oxygen mask on. But sometimes our best therapy and our best heart-filling joy can come from having a positive impact on others. Leaning into our faith, leaning into our desire to help and to serve, and finding a way to do that. And you can bet that in my gratitude box on Saturday night, I wrote that down because it was huge. It was a huge lesson for me that I was too busy. I was trying to control too much, and I wasn't filling my heart and my soul. So whatever your faith is, whatever that looks like for you, I'm sure somewhere in there you have a story. Lean into that story. Remember it, write it down for your gratitude box, journal on it. And if you're not a person, if you're not a person of faith, a person of religion, a person of whatever, there are so many other methods of spirituality that will help you be in tune with whatever it is that you believe in, and for service and being, most people want to be a good person, whatever that looks like for them, whether it's faith driven, whatever. Most people want to be a good person. They want to be perceived that way. They want to feel that way. And that is part of that cup that I'm talking about when I'm talking about feeding your heart and soul. So, okay, I hope that some of that made sense. I know that was a lot. There were some laundry lists of things you could do in there. But my challenge to you this week, to wrap up this mini series is to do one thing this week that fills you instead of draining you. Do one thing this week that fills you instead of draining you. Call someone that you actually want to talk to. Sit in quiet time for like 10 minutes doing, journaling, praying, reflecting, doing gratitude, whatever it is that works for you. Spend 10 minutes in the quiet doing that. Do something that you enjoy without guilt. Help someone on purpose. And just any of those things. Do something that brings you joy. It doesn't have to make money. It doesn't have to hit a timeline, or a deadline or whatever. It just has to be something that fills you with joy. It doesn't necessarily have to be for somebody else, but I think that a lot of us tend to gravitate towards wanting to help and wanting to serve others in some sort of way. And if that's the case, then a lot of times we feel joy when we know we're able to do that. So again, I hope you found this helpful. The challenge is to do something this week that fills you up, not drains you. And remember that we don't burn out because we're busy. We burn out because we're not refilling our cup. We're not putting our oxygen mask on before we try to do for others. That's that airplane analogy, which is also summed up in the you can't pour from an empty cup. There's lots of ways to say it. We're all saying the same thing. And also I'm thinking about expanding this whole mini series into like an ebook or something of that nature. So let me know if that's something you'd like to see. Let me know if that's something you'd like to dig into a little bit more than what I've covered in these 30-minute lives. All right, that's it. I hope you found this helpful. I hope you found something inspiring in today's message. Let me know, shoot me, if you do the challenge, let me know by shooting me a message, dropping a comment, whatever. If you found this helpful, share. And remember that this live video will be up on the whole mini series. The first 2 parts are on my YouTube channel already, and today's will be up within the hour. All right. I hope you have a fabulous day. And until next Wednesday, be well. Bye.